My name's Sarah, and if you're expecting a fairy tale, you might want to look elsewhere. My life's been anything but. By now, I'm a microsurgeon, got a decent house, and you could say I've done alright for myself. But let me take you back to where it all started, back when life was anything but easy. I was just 8 when my dad passed away. He was the one person who made me feel like I was worth something. After he was gone, my mom, Ellen, didn't waste any time finding a new man. Mark, my stepdad, looked at me like I was a piece of gum stuck to his shoe from day one. Mark never laid a hand on me, but man, did he have a way with words. It was like he had a talent for making me feel like I was just taking up space. My mom? She might as well have been a ghost for all the defending she did. Can't you do anything right? Mark would bark at me for just about anything, laughing too loud, forgetting the dishes, you name it. It was like I was living with a ticking time bomb, never knowing what would. And then, when Mom got pregnant again and had my little sister, Emily, things went from bad to worse. I was thrilled to have a sister, don't get me wrong, but Mark saw it as the final nail in my coffin. We've got our own kid now. We don't need to be wasting resources on her, he told Mom, like I wasn't even there. You're just too much, Sarah. Always making a mess, always in the way, he'd complain. My own mother just nodded along, as if agreeing that I was nothing but a problem. One time, I tore my pants playing outside, a normal kid thing, right? But not in Mark's eyes. Look at her, just can't keep herself out of trouble. Tearing clothes now, what's next? Ellen, she's your daughter, but she's a disaster. Mom's response? Mark's right, Sarah. You need to be more careful. We can't afford to keep replacing your clothes. It felt like every little thing I did was under a microscope, every mistake blown up to be some kind of major catastrophe. My laughter, my tears, even just being me, it was all too much for them, or so they made it seem. Even as a kid, I got the message loud and clear. I was the outsider, the one who didn't fit into this picture-perfect family Mark and Mom were trying to paint. And with every passing day, that feeling of being superfluous, of being an unwanted extra, just kept growing. After the whole debacle with Mark and Mom, I found myself landing at Aunt Linda's doorstep. Think of it as going from the frying pan into the fire. Aunt Linda, Dad's sister, had this vibe like she'd chew you up and spit you out for breakfast without a second thought. Great, another mouth to feed, she grumbled the day I showed up with my suitcase, a little lost and a lot scared. Her house was the strict, no-nonsense zone where fun went to die. And me? I was about to become its newest inmate. The rules were simple, do as told, don't mess up, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get through the day without a lecture. Fat chance of that happening with me being, well, me. Can't you do anything right, Sarah? Aunt Linda's favorite greeting, usually after I'd done something like leaving a light on or not making my bed so you could bounce a quarter off it. One day, I forgot to take the trash out, a mortal sin in Linda's house. You're just as useless as your mother said. Can't even remember a simple task, she barked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I'm sorry, Aunt Linda. It won't happen again, I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. Apologies were like fuel to her fire, though. Sorry doesn't cut it, girl. You live under my roof, you follow my rules. Got it? Or is that too complicated for you to understand? Her words were like daggers, each one hitting its mark. It wasn't all bad, though. Some days, when I managed to stay under the radar, I'd find a quiet corner and lose myself in books, my escape from the constant criticism. But even that was a gamble. Reading again? That's not going to get you anywhere. You need to learn to do something useful, Linda would scoff, as if reading was a crime. The worst part wasn't the chores or the strict rules, it was the loneliness. I missed my sister, Emily, and even though Mom and Mark were no saints, there was a part of me that longed for something familiar, something like home. But Aunt Linda's place? It felt more like a prison. One evening, I tried to cook dinner, a peace offering of sorts. I was no chef, but I figured spaghetti couldn't be too hard. Boy, was I wrong. The sauce ended up everywhere but in the pot, a literal hot mess. Linda walked in, and her face went from 0 to furious in a second. What in the world do you think you're doing? This kitchen is a disaster. I wanted to help. To make dinner, I mumbled, my attempt at being helpful turning into yet another failure. Help? You call this helping? You've just made more work for me. Don't ever try this again. You're more trouble than you're worth, she snapped, her words stinging like salt in a wound. That night, I cried myself to sleep, not for the first time since landing in her care. It was clear I was nothing but a burden to her, just like I had been to Mom and Mark. The message was loud and clear, I didn't belong anywhere. The worst part wasn't the constant chores or the never-ending criticism, it was the way she made me feel about myself. You're just worthless, you know that? No wonder your mom dumped you here. She's probably relieved to be rid of you, she'd hiss whenever I dared to talk back or question her. Deep down, I clung to this naive hope that my mom would realize she missed me, that she'd come back for me. I used to imagine her showing up at Linda's doorstep, apologizing for everything and taking me back home. I believed, foolishly, that she still loved me, that maybe she was just too caught up with my stepdad and sister to reach out. One day, desperation got the better of me. I snuck into Aunt Linda's room and grabbed her phone, my heart racing as I dialed my mom's number. The phone rang, and for a moment, I held my breath, hoping for, I don't know, a miracle? Hello? Mom's voice came through, unfamiliar and distant. Mom, it's me, Sarah. I miss you, I stammered, tears choking my words. There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence that felt like an eternity. Then, Sarah, you shouldn't have called. Don't call me again. You don't need me. The line went dead. So did something inside me. That call shattered any illusion of love or care from her. I was truly alone. Aunt Linda found out, of course. She always found out everything. You little thief. How dare you use my phone without permission, she raged, her face twisted in anger. The punishment that followed was harsh, more for the betrayal she felt than the act itself. That night, as I lay in my bed, nursing my bruises, both physical and emotional, a hard truth settled in. My mom didn't love me. She never would. And Aunt Linda's words echoed in my mind, a cruel mantra that seemed to confirm my worst fears. No one needs you. After the whole debacle with Aunt Linda, I found myself standing on the doorstep of Grandma Judy's house, my bags feeling like they were filled with rocks instead of clothes. I wasn't sure what to expect. My memories of Grandma were fuzzy at best, and Aunt Linda's parting words, good luck with her, you'll need it, weren't exactly comforting. Grandma Judy opened the door, and there she was, a stern look on her face that didn't exactly scream welcome home. So, you're here, she said, her voice as cold as I remembered Aunt Linda's heart. Come in, then. We've got rules in this house. You'll follow them. The first few weeks were rough. I kept to myself, trying not to step on any landmines. Grandma was tough, her words sharp as knives. Every mistake I made, she was there, pointing it out. Can't you do anything right? Your mother really didn't teach you much, did she? She'd snap. But something strange happened as the days turned into weeks. I started to see cracks in Grandma's tough exterior. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table struggling with some math homework, she sat down beside me, her tone less harsh than usual. Let me see that, she said, taking the pencil from my hand. Math was always my strong suit. It was the first time we'd done anything together that didn't involve a lecture. And as we worked through the problems, I caught her smiling at me, a genuine smile that I hadn't seen from any family member in, well, ever. Thanks, Grandma, I said, surprised at the warmth spreading through my chest. Don't thank me yet. You've still got to pass that test, she replied, but the edge in her voice was gone. Days turned into months, and those months into a year. Grandma and we found a rhythm. She taught me how to cook, telling me stories about my mom as a child, stories I clung to because they made me feel closer to the woman who'd left me behind. Your mom was a wild one, always getting into trouble. You've got her spirit, Grandma said one day, a hint of pride in her voice. It was during one of our cooking lessons that I finally opened up about how much it hurt, being abandoned by Mom. Grandma listened, really listened, and when I was done, she wrapped me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe. Your mom, she made her choices, but they're not on you. You're strong, stronger than you realize. And you're wanted, here, with me. That was the turning point. For the first time since Dad died, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Grandma wasn't just a relative, she was becoming my family, the kind you choose, not the kind you're born into. One evening, out of the blue, Grandma said, "I've been thinking. How would you feel about making this official? You know, adoption." I was speechless. The thought of belonging, really belonging to someone again, filled me with a mix of hope and disbelief. You mean it? I asked, barely daring to believe it. I've never been more serious about anything, Grandma replied, her gaze steady on mine. I want you to be in every sense of the word. Turning my life around wasn't easy, but with Grandma Judy's backing, I started to see a future for myself, one where I wasn't defined by my past. Medicine. That was the dream. It sounded crazy at first, even to me. I mean, going from feeling worthless to dreaming of becoming a microsurgeon? But Grandma, she believed in me, more than I ever believed in myself. Medicine, huh? Grandma raised an eyebrow the day I told her. That's a tough road, Sarah. You sure you're up for it? Yeah, I am, I replied, more to convince myself than her. I want to do something meaningful, you know? Help people. Grandma nodded, her expression softening. Then you'll do it. And I'll be right here, cheering you on. Getting into medical college was my next big hurdle. The books, the late nights, the endless exams, it was like diving into an ocean without knowing how to swim. But every time I thought about quitting, I'd remember Grandma's words, her faith in me. That kept me going. One day, after I got my acceptance letter, Grandma and I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter lying between us like a trophy. I knew you could do it, she said, her eyes misty. I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma, I admitted, feeling a lump form in my throat. None of that now. She brushed off the sentiment with a wave of her hand. You did the work, kid. You earned this. Medical school was a blur of sleepless nights, relentless studying, and the constant pressure to prove I belonged there. I made friends, sure, but I always felt like the odd one out, the girl who had clawed her way in from a world they knew nothing about. Hey, Sarah, you coming out with us tonight? A classmate, Jake, asked me one day. We're celebrating the end of exams. I hesitated, my mind on the mountain of study material waiting for me back at my dorm. I don't know, Jake. I've got so much to catch up on. Come on, everyone needs a break. Plus, you aced the exams. If anyone deserves to celebrate, it's you. Maybe he was right. For once, I decided to let go, to be just another medical student, not the girl with the chip on her shoulder. That night, I laughed and danced, feeling lighter than I had in years. But as medical school progressed, the challenges grew tougher. There were moments when I felt like I was in over my head, drowning in a sea of knowledge I could never fully grasp. One particularly tough day, after failing a simulation test, I called Grandma, fighting back tears. I don't know if I can do this, Grandma. It's just so hard. Sarah, her voice was stern, yet gentle, over the phone. You faced harder things in life than this. You're going to be an amazing doctor. Now, dry those tears and get back to it. You hear me? Her words were like a beacon in the storm. I dug my heels in, refusing to let this dream slip through my fingers. I studied harder, pushed myself further, and slowly, things started to click. The day I graduated, Grandma was there in the front row, her face beaming with pride. "I told you, didn't I? My granddaughter, the doctor," she said, wrapping me in a hug that felt like home. "Thanks, Grandma," I whispered, holding back tears. "For believing in me when no one else did. Always, Sarah. Always." Graduating from medical college was a milestone, sure, but it was the internship that really tested me. Long hours, tough cases, and always that pressure to prove I belonged there. But every time I felt like I was in over my head, I'd think back to what Grandma Judy had taught me about strength and perseverance. "Remember, Sarah, it's not about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward," she'd say, her voice a steady presence in my mind during those grueling nights at the hospital. Our conversations, whenever I managed to snatch some time away from the hospital, were my lifeline. We'd sit in her kitchen, sipping tea, and I'd share every detail of my day, every success, and every setback. She'd listen, really listen, and then offer her nuggets of wisdom. "You're doing important work, Sarah. Healing others, that's a noble path," she'd say, her eyes twinkling with pride. And in those moments, I felt like I could do anything. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Just as I was settling into my role, feeling like I was finally contributing something meaningful, Grandma Judy passed away. It was sudden, a shock to my system that left me reeling. She was my rock, my family, and suddenly, she was gone. Organizing the funeral was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I wanted it to be perfect, a fitting tribute to the incredible woman she was. But as I looked around the chapel, I realized something heartbreaking. There were no relatives there, no blood family. Just friends, colleagues, and the many lives Grandma Judy had touched. It was a stark reminder of how alone I truly was in that familial sense. Yet, as I stood there, delivering the eulogy, I felt a strange sense of strength. Grandma Judy had taught me well. She'd prepared me for this moment, not just to face the world without her, but to do so with grace and courage. "After everything, it's just me now," I said, my voice steady, despite the tears threatening to fall. "But I carry a piece of her with me, in every life I touch, in every decision I make. She was my family, my everything. And though she's gone, her legacy lives on through me." The silence of my apartment was a sanctuary, a rare moment of peace in my otherwise hectic life. That was until the knock came, sharp and insistent, echoing through the room like a foreboding omen. I hesitated, knowing instinctively that whatever lay on the other side of that door was not going to be good. My intuition didn't disappoint. Opening the door, I was met with the all-too-familiar faces of my past, Ellen, my mother, with her practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes, Mark, my stepfather, whose disdain for me was barely concealed beneath his surface-level politeness, and Emily, my half-sister, looking uncomfortable and out of place. Mom wasted no time. "Sarah, darling, we've missed you. It's been too long." Her voice was sugary, the falseness of her affection grating against my nerves. I chuckled. "Really? Because it feels just right to me." "What brings you here after all these years?" Mark intervened in the conversation. "Cut the crap, Ellen. We're not here for a family reunion. We're here about Judy's inheritance." The mention of Grandma Judy's name tightened my chest, a mix of grief and anger swirling within me. Mom couldn't stand it. "Sarah, we're here for our share. You know, of Judy's things. It's only fair," she declared, her voice a mix of entitlement and false sweetness. I couldn't help but scoff at her audacity. "Fair? You're talking to me about fair now? After 19 years of radio silence?" She bristled at that, her eyes narrowing. "Don't be ungrateful, Sarah. You've made a fortune for yourself, and now with Judy's inheritance. Well, it's only right you share." The laughter that burst from me was sharp, almost bitter. "Ungrateful? You've got some nerve. You left me, remember? I owe you nothing." Their audacity was astounding, their presence in my home a stark reminder of the pain they'd caused. Mom's face tightened, a mix of anger and something else, maybe shock. You're rich now, a successful doctor. And Judy's inheritance. You must give us our due, or we'll take this to court. We'll claim alimony. That's when I let the bomb drop. Good luck with that. Judy adopted me. Legally, you're nothing to me now. The color drained from her face, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Mark's face darkened, his posture stiffening as he stepped closer, his voice a low growl. You think you've won, huh? You'll regret this, Sarah. You haven't seen the last of us. But they didn't scare me. Not anymore. I've dealt with worse. I'm not afraid of you. Now, please leave my apartment, I said, my voice steady. In the aftermath of my family's brazen demand for a share of Grandma Judy's inheritance, I foolishly believed that chapter of my life was closed. How wrong I was. Their audacity knew no bounds. They had taken up residence in Judy's house as if it were their ancestral right. The news came from Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor with a penchant for keeping an eye out, her voice tinged with worry over the phone. Sarah, dear, I thought you should know, there are people living in your grandma's house. Didn't seem right not to tell you. Fueled by a mix of anger and a sense of duty to Judy's memory, I went to confront them. They were sprawled in the living room, making themselves at home in a place they had no right to be. What the hell do you think you're doing here? I demanded, my voice firm, trying to keep the bubbling anger at bay. Mark, ever the provocateur, lounged on the sofa with a smirk that made my blood boil. Oh, look who decided to show up. We're just making ourselves comfortable, seeing as we're family and all, he retorted, his words dripping with unwarranted entitlement. Their audacity was astounding. You're no family of mine. And you sure as hell don't belong here. This is my property, legally left to me by Grandma Judy. You need to leave. Now. I shot back, standing my ground against the man who had made my childhood a misery. Mom, with her skewed sense of reality, chimed in. Don't be so dramatic, Sarah. We're just here for what's rightfully ours. Judy would have wanted it that way. Her attempt to manipulate Judy's wishes was transparent and pathetic. You wouldn't know what Judy wanted. You weren't there for her, remember? You have no claim here, and if you don't leave, I'll have to involve the police. I warned them, my patience wearing thin. The threat seemed to hit home. Mark stood up, trying to use his height to intimidate me, but those tactics no longer worked on me. You wouldn't dare, he bluffed, but his confidence was faltering. Try me. You have until the end of the day. If you're not out by then, I'll have the authorities here so fast your heads will spin, I declared, the resolve in my voice unmistakable. They knew then that I was serious, that the scared little girl they once knew was gone, replaced by someone who wouldn't be bullied or intimidated. They left, their departure marked not by triumph, but by the realization that they had underestimated me. I watched them go, a sense of victory mixed with the exhaustion of dealing with their never-ending greed. In the days following the showdown, a semblance of peace had begun to settle over me. But that tranquility was shattered by a call from Mrs. Henderson. Sarah, dear, you need to come over. Someone's gone and broken the windows at your grandma's place. Rushing over, the sight that greeted me was a jarring reminder of the spite my family was capable of. I bet it was Mark, I muttered under my breath, my suspicions voiced aloud without proof to back them. Mrs. Henderson, ever the watchful guardian of our street, chimed in with a revelation that sparked a flicker of hope amidst the anger. You know, I've got those cameras installed. They point right over here. Maybe we caught who did it. Together, we pored over the footage, the grainy images flickering on the screen until the unmistakable figure of my stepfather appeared, stones in hand, malice in his actions. Armed with the evidence, my next call was to the police. I explained the situation, my voice steady, the evidence clear. I have video proof of my stepfather vandalizing the property. He's caused significant damage. The officer on the line was sympathetic, promising swift action. We'll handle it from here, ma'am. We've got enough to bring him in. True to their word, the police acted, and Mark was detained, the reality of his actions catching up with him at last. The threat of legal repercussions loomed large, and faced with the prospect of arrest, my mother and stepfather did the only thing they seemed capable of when confronted with the consequences of their actions: they disappeared. In the aftermath, the silence that settled over Grandma Judy's house was different. It was not the oppressive silence of abandonment, but the peaceful quiet of resolution. The broken windows would be repaired, not just as a physical mending, but as a symbol of my own healing from the years of neglect and manipulation.